Have you noticed that no one teaches you how to identify the narcissist's endgame? On the contrary, they say they're invincible, that they never change, that you'll always be trapped under their control. But this is a lie, repeated so often that it's become a belief. The truth, as Carl Jung would say, is counterintuitive. All the power a narcissist possesses depends solely on your reaction. And when that reaction changes, their castle begins to crumble silently. There's no need to argue, prove, or wear yourself out. The signs appear in the most hidden details, in the wavering gaze, the betraying word, the failed trick. They're invisible evidence for those who haven't learned to see beyond the persona, but clear as daylight for those who have already walked a path of shadow work and spirituality. The game doesn't end in dramatic explosions, but in small cracks that reveal the fragility behind the mask. And what almost no one tells you is that these signs emerge much sooner than you imagine. They don't require effort, just awareness. With every indifference you make, with every simple gesture, his ego twists and loses ground. It's like watching a hunter become prey without having to lift a finger. And it's precisely at this point that the narcissist fears more than anything, his silent freedom. Today's video will show you the 7 hidden pieces of evidence that prove the game is already over, and you might not even realize it. When you're done watching, you'll never look at this dynamic the same way again. You'll realize it's not about fighting it, but about recognizing that power has always been in your hands. And if this sounds controversial, it's because it's not for everyone. It's only for those ready to see what has been hidden for too long. The silence the narcissist cannot bear. Silence for many can be rest, introspection, or even spirituality. But for the narcissist, this same silence is an invisible poison. They feed on reactions, expressions, any spark that confirms their ego's power over your life. When the person doesn't respond, doesn't justify themselves, the mask of their persona begins to crack. Carl Jung once said that archetypes reveal hidden forces, and in this case, the controller archetype loses its meaning without an audience. It's curious. While silence liberates those who learn shadow work, it suffocates those who depend on attention to exist. Imagine the scene: the narcissist launches a provocation, expecting that old script, the victim defending themselves, crying, justifying themselves. But instead, what do they find? A calm, wordless gaze. This moment is almost unbearable, because the silence holds a mirror up to their persona, revealing the fragility behind their apparent power. It's like watching an actor on stage without an audience. They forget their lines, lose their way. The theater crumbles. It's in this emptiness that control slips through their fingers. From a practical standpoint, anyone who has experienced responding with silence knows how disarming it is. It's not about escape, but about awareness. Shadow work shows that reacting often fuels the game. Conversely, remaining silent is like removing pieces from the board. Think of common situations: a family argument, an aggressive message, or even an online provocation. Choosing silence isn't passivity, it's strategy. It's giving their ego such a wide berth that it becomes claustrophobic. And here, something even deeper comes into play. Silence is not just the absence of words, but the presence of self. It's when a person stops identifying with the wounded ego and begins to breathe the spirituality of the moment. Carl Jung would call this contact with the self. And the self doesn't need to shout to be heard, because its strength is archetypal. It is in this space that true power is born, not reacting to impulse, but transforming one's own energy into solid presence. Interestingly, this silence also opens internal doors. Those who can maintain calm discover nuances of their own shadow. They uncover hidden anger, the need for approval, the fear of rejection. All of this comes to the surface when there are no words to mask it. And that's when the process becomes a spiritual training. Every second of silence is a deeper dive into oneself. The narcissist can't handle it because silence reveals their fragility. You learn to endure it because you discover your own strength. But the interesting thing is to observe what comes after this discomfort, the moment when the manipulation begins to lose its effect. When manipulation starts to lose its effect, there's an almost imperceptible moment when the manipulation no longer has the same impact. Before, each word from the narcissist felt like a sentence, each criticism a wound. But little by little, something changes within those who undergo the shadow work process. Awareness expands, and the game begins to become predictable. Carl Jung reminded us that when we bring the unconscious to light, it loses its power to control us. The narcissist may even repeat the script, but they no longer find an audience willing to applaud. It's as if the victim's mind begins to see through the magic trick before the card is revealed. A practical example of this occurs in relationships. Imagine someone who constantly fell into the trap of emotional blackmail. "If you truly loved me, you would do this for me." Previously, this phrase generated immediate guilt. But now, with the clarity gained through spirituality and the study of archetypes, the person sees manipulation for what it is, a mechanism of the ego trying to maintain control. The emotional impact diminishes, and with it, the narcissist's power weakens. It's as if an actor continues to perform for an audience that already knows the entire script. The magic simply disappears. The fascinating thing is that at this stage, there's no need to confront or fight. The change happens from the inside out. The manipulator's words begin to sound hollow, almost mechanical. The inner silence becomes an invisible wall, and it's at this point that the narcissist begins to feel something new: the loss of psychic territory. They realize that the space they once occupied is being returned to its rightful owner. And ironically, the more they try to increase the pressure, the clearer it becomes that it's no longer effective. It's common for the narcissist to increase their intensity during this phase. They may become more aggressive, theatrical, or dramatic. This happens because, realizing their weapons are weakening, they seek to regain control at any cost. But this is where spirituality comes in as an antidote. Instead of letting themselves be swept away by the storm, those who have already walked the path of self-discovery learn to dance in the rain without getting wet. It's as if each attack is just another desperate attempt by the ego to survive. And the more they persist, the more obvious it becomes that manipulation no longer has the same power. This process is almost invisible to outsiders. But within the relationship, the impact is enormous. The narcissist begins to lose his aura of untouchability, and his persona shows signs of wear. That look of security and superiority, so typical, begins to waver. It's at this moment that the first crack reveals itself, and the victim, now awakened, realizes the puppet has lost its strings. But there's something even more revealing: the specific moment his gaze changes, and it's in this gaze that the game truly begins to be unmasked. The moment his gaze changes, there's a subtle, almost imperceptible moment when the narcissist's gaze reveals the truth they try to hide behind their persona. Anyone who's delved into the studies of Carl Jung knows that the eyes are portals to the unconscious, revealing archetypes that not even the ego can disguise. This gaze, once confident and filled with artificial authority, transforms into something restless, empty, as if the soul has been caught without a mask. It's at this moment that one realizes that manipulation no longer has the same effect, and the energy shifts. The power begins to slip from their grasp, beyond their control. It's interesting to note that this look isn't one of immediate anger, but of surprise. It's as if the narcissist is silently saying, "Well, why isn't this working anymore? When they realize that provocations don't elicit tears, that criticism doesn't generate defenses, that blackmail doesn't create guilt, their eyes betray this internal flaw. And this is where spirituality shows its value. Those who have learned to practice shadow work and recognize their own triggers can see in the other person's gaze confirmation of their own evolution. This look is, at once, a confession and a surrender. Imagine a practical situation. For years, during a marital argument, the victim always reacted with shouting, justifications, and accusations. But one day, instead of fighting back, she just takes a deep breath and remains calm. The narcissist insists, pressures, and makes calculated remarks. And then, suddenly, that look appears. The look of someone who realizes they've lost their main weapon. It's a look that mixes despair and disbelief. There's no hiding it. It's as if, in that instant, their ego realizes the audience is no longer applauding the show. From a psychological perspective, this look is a reflection of the persona cracking. Jung said the persona is merely a social mask, but when it ceases to be validated by others, a crack appears through which the unconscious escapes. In this space, the eyes don't lie. The narcissist may speak loudly, gesticulate, and invent excuses, but their eyes betray their vulnerability. And those who have learned to see beyond the obvious realize that there's more than anger there. There's fear. The fear of losing control, of being exposed, of no longer having power over someone's destiny. And it's curious how this visual detail connects to something larger. Anyone who has worked with spirituality knows that energy manifests itself in the eyes before it manifests itself in words. That's why this moment is so symbolic. It shows, without needing words, that the game is changing sides. And the most intriguing thing is that often the victim doesn't even immediately realize what happened. Only later does he understand that his own reactions, or lack thereof, were responsible for exposing this defeat. But this is revealed even more clearly in the next point, how your reactions, without you noticing, betray his fragility. How your reactions expose his defeat without you noticing. It's curious to realize that often there's no need to raise your voice, make speeches, or prove anything. The natural reaction of someone who has undergone shadow work is enough to disarm the narcissist. Carl Jung said that the unconscious overflows in small actions, and this applies to both those who manipulate and those who learn to free themselves. A simple, calm sigh, a firm look, a light laugh amidst an attempted attack, all of this communicates to their ego that the dominance is over. And the most fascinating thing is that most of the time, you don't even realize you're already conveying this silent victory. Imagine a practical example. For years, when wrongly accused, someone would immediately defend themselves, elaborating on explanations and trying to justify themselves. But after better understanding the archetypes and realizing how the narcissist's persona sustains itself in conflict, this same person now reacts calmly. A simple, okay, or even a silent smile is enough. This small change is devastating for those who depend on their energy for sustenance. They expected war, but found peace. They expected tears, but found steadfastness. Their reaction, as simple as it may seem, betrays their defeat. The most interesting thing is that these reactions are not staged. They arise from an internal maturation. Those who delve into spirituality and begin to integrate their own shadows no longer feel the same need to react to every provocation. The ego is no longer in control, and when the ego no longer rules, calm becomes natural. This calm is like an invisible sword. It doesn't cut violently, but rather exposes the emptiness of the other's advances. This is where Jungian psychology finds direct application in practical life. And this silent exposure is something the narcissist cannot bear, because they realize, albeit unconsciously, that they have lost the ability to dictate the rhythm. It's like a conductor who raises the baton only to discover that the orchestra no longer responds. Their persona weakens, their gaze wavers, and every gesture of the free victim becomes a reminder that the narrative has changed hands. Therefore, often, the most powerful reaction is precisely the one that seems unassuming. A simple, "I won't discuss this now," can sound like a final sentence. And the curious thing is that this victory doesn't need to be celebrated. It simply happens. Anyone who has experienced this liberation knows that the game changes effortlessly. The narcissist senses defeat, even if you haven't planned anything. It's at this point that their most common tricks, the ones that always worked, begin to fail in the face of this new stance. And when the trick fails, they experience the greatest fragility of all, realizing they've lost the power they believed was eternal. The most used trick that suddenly fails, the narcissist is like a magician who repeats the same trick over and over, trusting the audience will never discover the secret. But there comes a point when the audience already knows where the false bottom of the hat lies. Their favorite trick, be it emotional blackmail, blame shifting, or manipulation through the victim persona, begins to lose its effect. Carl Jung reminds us that everything unconscious governs until it becomes conscious. When the victim awakens, the spell breaks, and what seemed like an infallible trick becomes nothing more than a predictable, almost pathetic gesture. A clear example is in romantic relationships. The narcissist uses guilt as a weapon. "You never understand me. If I'm like this, it's because of you. No one will love you like I do." These phrases were once like accurate arrows. But when someone starts practicing shadow work and begins to see their own shadow, this poison loses its power. The victim no longer feels the same need to justify themselves, nor does they carry guilt that isn't theirs. And then the trick fails. They repeat the same old formula, but no longer see the impact they expected. This collapse of the trick reveals something profound. He didn't have as many resources as he seemed. His arsenal of manipulations was, in fact, a limited repertoire. Notice how, when one strategy no longer works, he quickly tries others, but always within the same control loop. It's like a chess player who only knows half a dozen moves. When the victim discovers this, the feeling is liberating. This isn't an invincible enemy, but a repetitive pattern. And patterns, once seen, lose their power to imprison. Spirituality teaches that when the ego loses its grip, space for the self emerges. And it is in this space that the trick definitively fails, because no matter how many times he tries to repeat the script, the victim no longer plays the role imposed on him. It's as if the stage were dismantled before the actor. The audience rose, the lights dimmed, and he insists on rehearsing lines that no one else hears. The flaw lies not only in the trick, but in the revelation that there was no magic at all, just cheap illusionism. And it is precisely in this breakdown of expectations that the narcissist experiences dread. He fears not the discovery of a specific trick, but the loss of its effect on the other. This emptiness is unbearable because it reveals that the control was not his, but always a reflection of the other's reaction. When the reflection disappears, the spell also breaks, and it is at this point that a new question arises. What truly terrifies the narcissist? It's not anger, it's not fighting, it's his indifference. And it is this fear that will become even clearer in the next stage. Why the narcissist fears your indifference. The narcissist thrives on reflection. He needs his words to provoke, his behavior to make an impact, his theatrics to find an audience. When the victim, after much shadow work and immersion in spirituality, begins to react with indifference, his castle begins to crumble. Carl Jung said that the ego needs constant nourishment to maintain control, and nothing is more devastating to the ego than the emptiness of a silent audience. Indifference is an invisible cut that exposes what he fears most, not being important. Consider a simple example. Someone who previously fell into every emotional trap. The narcissist would yell, accuse, and make a scene, and this person would cry, explain themselves, and corrode themselves. Now, after working through their own shadows and understanding the archetypes at play, they simply respond with an okay and move on. There's no drama, no argument. This okay weighs more than 1,000 arguments because it reveals that the power to manipulate has vanished. For the narcissist, indifference is like a sentence of invisibility. Indifference, in practice, is the withdrawal of fuel. It's like extinguishing a flame because the oxygen has run out. The narcissist may insist, try to provoke even more, but their energy finds no response. And that's the point. It's not about angrily ignoring, but about truly not carrying the weight of it anymore. It's like looking at a child struggling for candy and not feeling obligated to give in. The maturity of the self looks beyond the other's ego and silently says, "This no longer defines me." Jung reminded us that the persona is merely a facade. When indifference emerges, the mask loses its meaning. Because no matter what role the narcissist plays, victim, hero, martyr, or villain, if there's no reaction, there's no show. Indifference dismantles the stage and reveals the emptiness behind the curtain. This is why he fears it so much. It shows that he's no longer in control of the narrative, and when he loses the narrative, he loses his reason for being in the relationship. And it's in this silent realm that something even deeper becomes apparent. The way the narcissist talks about you begins to reveal their fragility. Indifference not only severs the bond of power, but also forces the other person to expose themselves in new ways. And often, without realizing it, they deliver in their own words the hidden signal that their control has already vanished. The hidden sign in the way he talks about you. When the manipulation loses its power and indifference sets in, the narcissist begins to talk about you differently. Carl Jung said that what we project onto others reveals what we can't stand in ourselves. That's exactly what happens here. Suddenly, his comments carry a strange tone, a mixture of resentment and fascination. It's as if the persona he's built around you is crumbling, and between the lines, he lets slip the discomfort of losing someone he can no longer hold on to. The signal is in the words. Before, direct accusations. Now, biased comments, loaded with insinuations. A practical example. He begins to say to others phrases like, "She's changed a lot. He's not the same anymore." After this phase, spirituality entered his life. He became distant. These phrases are not neutral, they are accusations. They reveal that his transformation has profoundly affected the narrative of control he tried to maintain. Shadow work not only changes his posture, but also forces the other person to reveal themselves through discourse. And it is in this discourse that the hidden signal appears, the unconscious recognition that control has been lost. This detail is fascinating because it requires no effort on your part. You don't need to defend yourself or counterattack. The narcissist's own words become evidence against him. When he speaks ill of you, when he spreads biased comments, he's not just trying to tarnish your image, he's revealing the loss of his persona. The image he projected of himself, of power, superiority, dominance, no longer holds up. And since he can no longer control you directly, he tries to control others' perceptions. But even here, the attentive eye detects the crack. Jung argued that archetypes act as forces that move the psyche. The hunter archetype, so present in the narcissist, feels threatened when the prey no longer runs, and this is reflected in their speech. The way they talk about you changes because deep down, they're dealing with the energy inversion. Before, you were the object of their narrative. Now they need to explain to themselves and others why they can no longer exert the same influence. This verbal effort is, in itself, a confession of weakness. And what's most intriguing is that at this point, a powerful psychological inversion begins to occur. The hunter, who always believed he dominated the territory, begins to become the prey itself. His discourse, previously charged with dominance, turns into justification. And every time he tries to explain what happened to you, he reveals what's happening to him. It's in this scenario that the psychological inversion is born, the inevitable next step in this silent dynamic. The psychological inversion, when the hunter becomes the prey, the dynamic reverses almost imperceptibly. The narcissist, who previously seemed to hold all the cards, begins to feel cornered by his own strategies. Carl Jung explained that what we repress returns in the form of a shadow, and the narcissist, realizing he's lost control, begins to be pursued by the very mechanism he's always used. It's as if the hunter archetype, previously dominant, is slowly overcome by the feeling of being watched, tested, and unmasked. And this reversal requires no effort on your part. It happens naturally when you stop being held hostage by his ego. Imagine an everyday situation. For years, he controlled the narrative, set the tone of conversations, knew exactly how to provoke and inflict pain. But now, when he launches a provocation, he realizes the reaction is no longer the same. He insists, raises the tone, dramatizes, and nothing. The emptiness restored by his calm begins to make him uncomfortable. The hunter realizes he's being measured by the victim's gaze, and this turns him into prey. It's not you who hunts him, it's his own unconscious that begins to scream, exposing hidden weaknesses. From a spiritual perspective, this inversion is even more symbolic. The narcissist has always tried to drain energy, to feed their ego with your vitality. But when spirituality becomes your axis, when you integrate your own shadows through shadow work, this energy is no longer accessible, and what was once a source of nourishment becomes a desert. Accustomed to drinking from your attention, they now thirst for control. And the more they seek, the more they realize they've lost access. This psychological desert is the greatest sign that the archetypes of victim and predator have reversed. It's important to understand that this reversal doesn't happen explosively, but gradually. It's small details, his gaze, which is no longer confident, his voice rising to compensate for the emptiness, his narrative sounding increasingly forced. All of these are signs that the hunter has lost his main weapon, the illusion of mastery. Jung said that the ego needs to believe in the myth of its own centrality. When this myth is destroyed, collapse is inevitable. The narcissist then finds himself surrounded by his own shadow, and this is the cruelest prison imaginable. And the most interesting thing is that at this stage, you don't need to do anything other than stick to your path. The psychological reversal is natural, almost archetypal. The narcissist, who always believed he was in control, becomes a prisoner of his own need for control. He hunts, but doesn't find. He seeks, but doesn't receive. And in this maze, the subtlest details begin to prove that the cycle has truly come to an end. It is precisely in an invisible detail that the final proof that control has ended appears. The invisible detail that proves control is gone. The narcissist's defeat doesn't come with fireworks or epic speeches. It reveals itself in an almost invisible detail, something that goes unnoticed by those who haven't learned to look beyond the surface. Carl Jung said that the unconscious speaks through symbols, and this symbolic detail is the silent sign that control is gone. It could be a wavering look, a sigh filled with frustration, a pause too long before responding. It's in these micro-gestures that the narcissist's persona dissolves, revealing that the mask no longer supports the weight of the game. This detail can manifest itself in many ways in everyday life. Imagine, for example, someone who always made a point of interrupting you, imposing the pace of the conversation. Suddenly, you notice them hesitating, waiting for your reaction before continuing. This slight delay is revealing. It shows that, even if they don't admit it, they've already recognized the shift in power. Shadow work teaches us to notice what's unsaid, and that's precisely the key. The invisible detail is the involuntary confession that control has slipped through their hands. Another common sign is a change in tone of voice. Previously firm, almost authoritative, it suddenly carries nuances of nervousness or a need for validation. It's as if the dominator archetype has lost its color, transforming into something lifeless. This change in rhythm, though subtle, is a psychological milestone. Someone who thrives on manipulation begins to indulge in small slip-ups that only those who have learned to integrate their own shadows can identify. Confrontation isn't necessary, just observe. Spirituality shows that the greatest movements happen in silence. The invisible detail is precisely that, an almost ethereal sign that the energy has shifted. It's like seeing an actor forget a line mid-performance. The audience may not notice, but they know it, and this knowledge undermines their confidence. The narcissist carries this feeling of irreversible failure, even if they try to hide it. The ego may scream, the persona may try to compose itself, but the invisible detail remains there, revealing the truth. And it's this detail that marks the definitive turning point. He can still try to manipulate, he can still use old tricks, but the essence has already been surrendered. Control is gone, and his own unconscious admits this with every micro-gesture. But the story doesn't end there. Because, after this detail, comes something even more powerful, a simple, unexpected gesture that ends the cycle of power once and for all. The simple gesture that ends the cycle of power. It's not a scream, it's not revenge, nor a dramatic scene. What definitively ends the cycle of power with the narcissist is usually a simple, almost banal gesture, but one laden with profound symbolism. Carl Jung said that it's the small, everyday acts that reveal great transformations in the unconscious. This gesture can be something as subtle as no longer answering a call, not responding to a message, or simply walking peacefully without looking back. To outsiders, it may seem like a small thing, but to the narcissist, it's the equivalent of a wall erected between them and their former victim. A practical example, someone who always justified themselves in the face of accusations decides one day to simply not respond. Another, a person who was trapped in a cycle of emotional arguments suddenly gets up from the table and goes to have coffee in silence. This gesture is devastating because it breaks the emotional routine that maintained control. Their ego, accustomed to dominating the scene, is left without a stage, without a script, without an audience. And in that moment, spirituality manifests itself in the form of action. It is the self taking the lead and ending the persona's spectacle. This gesture is simple precisely because it comes from within. It requires no effort or drama. It's natural, like breathing. It's the inevitable consequence of someone who has already walked the path of shadow work and integrated their own shadows. There's no need to prove anything to the other because there's nothing left to prove. It's the maturity of the sage archetype replacing the anxiety of the ego. That's why the gesture seems small, but it echoes like thunder in the narcissist's psyche. Jung asserted that when the unconscious becomes conscious, life changes direction. This gesture is the materialization of this principle. It shows in action that you no longer need to fight to achieve freedom because you are already free. And this freedom is not noisy, but silent. The narcissist may even try to dismiss it, may invent stories to lessen the impact, but deep down he knows the cycle of power is over. This gesture, simple and silent, is the final straw he never imagined he would receive. And it's at this point that the story closes in on itself. There's no revenge, no spectacle, just a return to inner balance. The narcissist remains trapped in the void they themselves created, while you move forward with ease. And that's when the journey takes on a new tone. It's not just about defeating someone, but about transforming your own soul. For when the cycle ends, what remains is the awareness that this whole process wasn't about them, but about you. And it's at this moment that we open space for the introduction of a new vision, the hidden evidence that the game is truly over. Now that you've seen every hidden detail, tell me, will you continue reacting as before, or will you use this knowledge to change your story? The narcissist always believed they controlled the game, but the evidence has shown otherwise, and only you can decide whether this victory will be silent or wasted. How many times have you found yourself giving in to manipulation, even though you knew something was wrong? How many times have you surrendered your peace to feed the ego of someone who only knew how to suck? The question now isn't about them, it's about you. Will you allow yourself to repeat the cycle, or will you end it once and for all with the simple gesture of awareness? Carl Jung said that individuation is the process of becoming who you truly are. And perhaps this is the perfect time to apply that. What you've learned here isn't distant theory, it's practical for your daily life, in silence, in indifference, in the details that seem small but contain great battles. And I challenge you. If this evidence has awakened something in you, what will change from today on? Will you apply this power to your relationships? Will you look your shadow in the eye and embrace your freedom? The answer lies within you, and the transformation begins now. So if this video resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here you'll continue learning how to decipher the unconscious, deal with the ego, understand archetypes, and delve into a liberating spirituality. The next step is already waiting for you, but only you can decide whether you'll take it.